Biden bows out. The U.S. president is no longer seeking re-election, now throwing his support behind his vice president as the Democratic Party's nominee. Taiwan's largest annual military exercises kick off, and this year there's a few new twists.
Members of churches from across eastern Taiwan have come here to Hualien County to learn how they can defend their communities from a Chinese attack.
Plus, the eye-catching circus troupe is heading to Paris for the Cultural Olympiad, bringing with it a message of body positivity. A warm welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Leslie Liao. U.S. President Joe Biden has dropped out of the race for the White House after growing concerns he was not fit for office. And he's endorsing his Vice President Kamala Harris as the Democrats' nominee to take on Donald Trump. Joyce Tseng has the latest.
Mr. President, how do you feel? How do you feel?
Despite a COVID diagnosis, a thumbs up from U.S. President Joe Biden the last time he was seen in public. Just days later, he posted a game-changing decision on social media to end his bid for re-election, saying he would stand down and focus on finishing out his term. Democrats and voters have been losing faith in Biden's mental fitness to beat Donald Trump, now officially the Republican presidential nominee.
Going back, I think this was all Biden's fault. I think he made a lot of really critical errors. He's the power of the incumbent in an election, and he acted like the outsider. He didn't have to do that debate. He didn't have to do all these things, but he put himself in the position that where this letter had to come out today was all him and him only.
In recent months, Biden's performance has sparked concerns about his mental acuity, from stumbling through a televised presidential debate to sensitive gaffes at a recent historic NATO summit.
And now I want to hand it over to the president of Ukraine, who has as much courage as he has determination. Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin. President Putin. You can beat President Putin. President Zelensky.
Now, some relief among American voters that there's a new way forward.
That it was a brave decision for him to step down, well, to pull himself out of the race. I think it was the correct one.
I am glad that Biden stepped down. You know, we've been really concerned about his policy towards Palestine and his, full-throated support for Israel and the ongoing genocide against the Palestinians.
The 81-year-old incumbent is now backing his vice president, Kamala Harris, to lead the Democratic ticket in the race for the White House. If elected president, Harris would likely continue many of Biden's foreign policies, including backing Ukraine against Russia and Taiwan's self-defense against China. Harris met Taiwan's leader Lai Ching-te back in 2022 in Honduras, when both were vice presidents representing their nations at the inauguration of President Xiomara Castro. Harris also spoke with Taiwan's envoy to APEC in San Francisco last November, chipmaker TSMC's founder Morris Chang. Despite Biden's support, Democrats have yet to name Harris as their official pick. It would be a historic nomination that would catapult the former California Attorney General, a child of Indian and Jamaican immigrants, to become the leader of a major party ticket.
The question for Vice President Harris is not whether can a woman win the presidency. It's can Vice President Harris win. Her approval ratings as vice president are not great. In fact, in kind of the current polling, the matchups against former President Trump, she's faring only kind of marginally better than President Biden. However, Vice President Harris is really probably the Democrat with the only Democrat with the visibility to mount a strong campaign in this time, less than 4 months before Election Day.
Trump has claimed that Harris will be easier to beat than Biden, appearing prepared to take on his potential new opponent, airing an ad targeting Harris just moments after Biden dropped out.
Kamala was in on it. She covered up Joe's obvious mental decline.
Many Democrats have quickly backed Harris, but others say the party should hold a mini primary. With time running out before the Democratic National Convention in August, pressure is on the party to use this major opportunity to draw up a stronger route to the White House. Patrick Chen and Joyce Sin for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan's largest annual military drills, the Han Kuan exercises, are officially underway. For the next 5 days, the country is simulating how it would respond to an attack from China. Jaime Khan takes a closer look at what's involved.
Now, this year is the 40th edition of the Han Kuan exercises. It's Taiwan's largest military drills that have been carried out since 1984. And the goal is to simulate how to defend against an all-out invasion from China. Now, this year, we're going to see a couple of key components from the military drills. On the first couple of days, we're going to see dozens of Taiwan's military aircraft fly from the west coast, that side that's closer to China. These bases here, those aircraft are going to be repositioning and flying and basing in the east coast of the island. And they're doing that to get away from the front line and to provide better protection because Taiwan doesn't have as many military aircraft as China does. Now, further in the week, we're going to see live fire exercises on the outlying islands of Taiwan only. That's Penghu, Matsu, and Jinmen. The MND says that this year they will not be conducting any live fire drills on the main island for safety concerns. Further down the week, we're also going to see a lot of airport defense shows. Now, Taiwan has several airports along the west coast and major cities, but the largest airport, Taoyuan International Airport, will close and suspend flights for about an hour on the 25th to allow the military to practice how to defend against an attack as the enemy would need these ports to provide more troops for that invasion. But the big thing about Han Kuan this year is all about decentralization, as these drills for the first time are unscripted. Now, for more on what that means, I spoke to Alessio Patalano. He's a war studies professor at the King's College in London.
Now, Han Kuan historically has always been first and foremost about domestic reassurance and cross-strait signaling. It was about communicating to both audiences in Taiwan and, if you want, observers in China, how seriously defense of Taiwan was taken by Taiwanese authorities. The interesting thing about it this year is that the emphasis that the new minister has put on this idea of exercising and testing decentralized the command and control function and therefore the resilience of the military. Why? Because exercises and training are the conditions in which different units in a theater may or may not be able to remain in close contact with the headquarters is absolutely essential in a context in which we know if ever there were to be high intensity crisis scenarios or indeed kinetic occurrences across the straits, the survivability of different units will be absolutely central to the Taiwanese capacity to respond effectively.
Now, Alessio, in talking about this decentralization idea and the fact that these drills are unscripted, is that a step towards more realistic combat training for Taiwan?
It definitely is. This is definitely what you would expect it to be, and in particular, this is where, for example, if you see in sort of complex exercises in both in the NATO or NATO members kind of context, that has become now a routine, a real world sort of combat experience for as much as it can be replicated, and relies heavily on adaptation and the capacity to adjust to conditions that sometimes you cannot foresee. So training for the unexpected, thinking on your feet, be quick about it. These are really important elements of any realistic and valuable type of training these days.
That was Alessio Patalano, Professor of War Studies at King's College London. Stay with us all this week as we continue our coverage of the Han Kuan exercises. The military says it detected a Chinese drone circling Taiwan as it began the Han Kuan drills. It said the drone circled the country's main island and crossed into its Air Defense Identification Zone, or ADIZ. It came as close as 67 kilometers to Taiwan's southernmost point. 12 Chinese military aircraft and 7 warships were also detected operating in the area. This is the 6th time since April 2023 that a Chinese drone has circumnavigated Taiwan. The war in Ukraine has led to soaring interest in civil defense training in Taiwan. While most classes focus on individuals, one grassroots initiative is instead preparing communities to respond to war. Louise Watt traveled to eastern Taiwan to find out what they're learning.
In this Presbyterian church for Indigenous people in eastern Taiwan, members are gathering not to study scripture, but war. Church pastor Zhang Zhengde is concerned about the frequent reports of Chinese military planes flying near Taiwan and believes the likelihood of China invading is increasing. He says the church network is a vital part of any resistance.
虽然要透过祷告，上帝掌权没错，但是我们还是有一个危机意识。那在教会里面能够凝聚部落里面的社区这里的凝聚力非常重要。
And sticking together is why Pastor Zhang has invited congregations from across this largely rural county to come here, so they can prepare together in advance for any invasion. China claims sovereignty over democratic Taiwan and vows to one day control it. These workshop attendees are doing tabletop war exercises, and they're learning that some of them could be collateral damage if China takes out a nearby airbase with missiles. So the aim of the workshop is to get them to consider what they could do in such a scenario. The workshop is run by the Taipei-based Academia for Masana, an organization set up a year ago by Lavagao Talimalau, who left behind his life as a scholar to promote community-based civil defense.
With this exercise, they can teach their own congregation members how we prepare. When people get together in a community, then you have more strength, skill, and resources. When all these strength, skill, and resources put together, you have better chance to survive.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine has increased interest in civil defense training among Taiwanese, who fear their large neighbor China could make good on its threats to take control of the island. But most of that training has focused on teaching individuals skills like first aid. The Indigenous churchgoers attending this course are learning how they can work together in preparation for and during wartime, identifying locations to stockpile food and setting up solar panels on their church roofs to counter power being knocked out.
如果断水或断电的时候，我们教会应该要开放一个空间哈。或者是教会的长子同工或医护人员或村里干事集结一些药物来帮助我们的灾民这样子。
我是觉得是大家每一个教会可以连结在一起的，然后我们除了可以自救，也可以去帮助别人。我觉得这是我们要去思考的一个点。
These church members leave the workshop vowing to pass on what they've learnt to their communities. Their focus is on their ultimate goal, to be ready for China, if or when it invades. Devon Tsai and Louise Watt for TaiwanPlus.
China and the Philippines appear to have reached an agreement aimed at easing tensions in the South China Sea. Yet, as Chris Gorn reports, there may still be some sticking points.
After several tense months, China and the Philippines may now be trying to lower the temperature in the South China Sea. Both sides have said resupply missions to Philippine sailors stationed on a ship grounded on the second Thomas Shoal will be allowed.
同菲方就运补人道主义生活物资达成临时性安排，体现了中方的善意。我们希望菲方信守承诺，同中方相向而行，共同管控好海上局势。
Philippine resupply missions have been at the center of numerous confrontations between the two countries' coast guards, with some turning violent. A mission in June saw Chinese Coast Guard personnel attack Philippine ships with sticks and axes. One Philippine guardsman lost his thumb in the scuffle. Sticking points in the deal may remain. Just hours after the deal was announced, the two sides released competing statements, with China saying it would conduct pre-inspections of the missions, something the Philippines has called inaccurate.
For China, which of course claims the outpost is illegal, it is trying to strong-arm the Philippines into essentially abandoning its rights. Philippines, of course, can't abide that because that going into an agreement with those conditions surrenders the question of jurisdiction over its own outpost.
The stakes for an armed conflict in the South China Sea are high. The United States has a mutual defense treaty with the Philippines, and U.S. officials have recently reiterated that an attack on disputed Philippine territories would trigger the pact, potentially pulling the U.S. into a war with China.
Well, first of all, just on the point of the Mutual Defense Treaty, we've made clear that it applies to public vessels in the South China Sea, and so China well understands our view of the application of the Mutual Defense Treaty should that line get crossed.
Both China and the Philippines have been careful to emphasize their goal of de-escalating the situation. But China's behavior in the South China Sea may also be hurting its international image and turning other countries against it.
This has not been going well for China. They just don't know how to stop pushing without looking like they've lost. And for them, looking like they've lost is the one place they can't seem to go.
Neither side has released the text of the agreement to the public. But there may be more details in Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr.'s upcoming State of the Nation speech, where the deal may face its first test. John Su and Chris Gorin for TaiwanPlus.
China's central bank has announced surprise interest rate cuts. On Monday, Beijing reduced the key lending rates by 10 basis points. The one-year loan prime rate is now 3.35% and the 5-year is 3.85%. Economists had expected the interest rates to remain unchanged. The cuts come as the government discusses tweaks to improve the economy. Taiwan's state-owned power company is blaming equipment failures for a spate of outages in the country's north. People who study Taiwan's power woes say these failures don't come as a surprise. John Van Trieste reports.
Northern Taiwan has seen a string of blackouts. Between Friday night and Sunday morning, 2 parts of Taipei and 1 part of Taoyuan went dark. In all, over 1,000 households lost power. Taiwan's state-run power company Taipower says 2 of these outages were caused by equipment failure. It's the same thing the company has said about other recent outages, from a blackout that hit a critical Taipei tech hub in June to a series of cuts in Taoyuan in the spring. And this kind of malfunction goes back years. In 2021, it was blamed for causing a grid failure that affected the whole country. Professor Ye Zhongguang says equipment failure like this is to be expected, given the way Taiwan's electric grid is managed. First, he says, maintenance doesn't happen as often as it should due to a shortage of workers. And then there's the fact that Taiwan doesn't have enough energy, and the power company's workaround, lowering the voltage, damages equipment over time.
Sometimes Taiwan Power Company has to do voltage step down from time to time to meet the power demand by the general public. And this voltage step down is not a very good procedure for the maintenance of all the electrical, for example, the power supply system and also the cables.
Ye says overcoming frequent blackouts, a major obstacle to the country's tech ambitions, will mean finding more workers to do the maintenance that gets overlooked when trying to keep an energy-hungry country up and running. Luffy Li and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
President Lai Ching-te has announced his party's goals for the coming year at the Democratic Progressive Party's annual National Congress. Lai, who also chairs the DPP, said the party should safeguard Taiwan's sovereignty, deepen its democratic systems, and protect freedom and human rights. Lai spoke to fellow party members in Taiwanese Hokkien rather than in the official language of government, Mandarin. He stressed that the DPP should work for the common good of Taiwan regardless of divisions within the party.
现在，咱的责任是团结人民，反并吞，确保国家主权。咱必须要凝集每一份的力量， 让国家认同不再成为外部分化、内部对立的破口，是团结国人的力量。
To find out more about the DPP Congress and what it could mean for the future of the ruling party, Rick Lauert spoke to Taichung-based political commentator Courtney Donovan Smith.
And this is obviously a chance for all of the main members of that main ruling party to come together and to discuss the direction that their party should take. So conspicuous in her absence was the former president, Han Kuan. Why do you think she may have missed this big meeting?
Well, there's some speculation on this, but most of it seems to be centered on she just isn't that interested. She's never really liked the whole faction system, and that's really getting ugly right now. But most of the reports basically had her quarters saying something to the effect that she just is not that interested. Now, keep in mind that basically since Lai has completely thrown out her formula, and now they're back to open warfare within the party, she is not part of any faction, and she's not in charge of the party. So there's not really a whole lot she could have done anyway, even if she was there. I suspect that she thought, kind of what's the point?
Could you tell us a bit about what other kind of factions or areas of the party there are, and how we might see that creating a problem for the party going forward?
Well, since the beginning of the DPP, there have been factions within the party as it came together from different groups of people when they founded the party. Initially, they were a lot more ideological in their nature. I think it's more now about power and patronage and getting plum positions within the party and government and plum positions in state-owned enterprises when they're in power. They battled it out, and it got really quite ugly in the 90s and 2000s. And their infighting would play out in the press. And so it was kind of embarrassing for the party, and it made the party look very disunified.
And given that we are witnessing this infighting, these different factions, and it often plays out kind of quite nastily in the media here, would you say that the ruling Democratic Progressive Party is a healthy political party?
It's quite concerning that Lai is consolidating so much power in New Tide members and his loyalists from Tainan. I point out two risks, one of which has come to pass, which is that the factions are now openly fighting with each other. But this over-consolidation of power within his loyalists, his clique, and New Tide and his allies, the concerning part about this is that it makes it's so incestuous, a relationship between these people. And keep in mind, the factions are kind of quasi in the open, quasi-secret organizations. And so what's concerning is it opens up a lot more potential for systemic corruption.
That was political commentator Courtney Donovan Smith talking to reporter Rick Lauert about the DPP Congress. From 5 rings to 3, with the Paris Olympics just around the corner, a circus troupe from Taiwan is confident that they'll catch the eye at the Cultural Olympiad that accompanies it. Sandy Chu reports.
Ling, director of a Taiwanese circus troupe that has created a series of performances for an all-female cast, has her own ideas about beauty.
美不是只有一种，每个人的每一种形态都是对我们来说都是一种美，所以其实对我们来说没有美丑之分。
Ling and her troupe, Eye-Catching Circus, are bringing this message to Paris for this summer's Cultural Olympiad.
这几年主要在做的一个系列是女马系列，那刚好欧洲现在或者不管是巴黎或者是英国或者是各个其他国家，它其实现在很多都关注在于女性议题的这件事情上面。
Eye-Catching Circus was established in 2015. Their most celebrated piece has proved to be hashtag since 1994. But in Paris, they hope to turn heads with a positive message in their work, Crazy Girls.
那金刚芭比是想要带着轻松 energy， 然后跟一些我们现在身为1994，我们这个年代，我们喜欢什么东西，我们觉得我们喜欢什么样的身体，我们喜欢追求健康、正向能量，其实都很多都是我们好做自己哦。我们想要让大家看到，每一个人不同的发光发热的那个样子。
Despite a series of successes, Eye-Catching Circus has had trouble recruiting female members for their ensemble in an industry dominated by men. The artists say people often perceive men as having more power and should take center stage. But it doesn't mean that women cannot be powerful as well, and they aim to challenge gender stereotypes and perceptions.
我们想要讨论的一个点是，不只是男生可以阳刚，可能女生也可以阳刚，女生可以阴柔，男生也可以阴柔。
Eye-Catching Circus will perform 3 shows at the end of July for the Cultural Olympiad. A troupe of crazy girls challenging gender norms with strength and grace in the heart of Paris. Scott Huang and Sandy Chi for TaiwanPlus.
We'd like to thank you for watching Taiwan Plus News. Finally, take a look at these zoo animals in Florida cooling off in the summer heat. I'm Leslie Liao, take care and see you next time.